17 million people. A mountain skyline so sharp it looks painted. Smog sitting in the basin like a second city above the first. In Tehran's streets right now, you'll hear Farsi laced with French loanwords, see ancient script on a billboard for a smartphone, smell saffron and diesel in the same breath. It is a city that feels simultaneously ancient and furiously alive. But here's the thing, Tehran isn't even old, not by Iranian standards. The center of power on this plateau has moved more times than most civilizations have existed. And the civilization itself, it predates Greece, Rome, and the Bible as a written text. What we're going to do is travel back, using ancient maps, Greek and Chinese accounts, Persian court records, Safavid miniature paintings, Qajar-era photographs, and the findings of archaeologists still brushing dust off things. We'll try to rebuild what this land actually looked and felt like across the centuries. These are informed reconstructions. The bones of history are solid. The texture, the color of a wall, the smell of a market, the noise of a particular crowd. That's our best educated guess. And we'll say so when it matters. The big question is this: how does one plateau become the engine of the world's first superpower, get erased, and then come back? Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. We'll find a teenage king who built an empire so large it controlled nearly half the people alive on Earth. A religion that rewired the entire culture within a single generation. A 20th century revolution that stunned the world's intelligence agencies. The plateau has always had a next chapter. Let's find out how it got here. Go back far enough, somewhere in the range of 7,000 to 9,000 years ago, and the Iranian plateau looks nothing like what empires would later fight over. It looks, in our best reconstruction, like a series of sheltered valleys between mountain ranges, with rivers running down from the Zagros peaks and spreading thin across the plain below. Warm, flat light in the mornings, the smell of grain and animal dung, wind cutting across open steppe. The people here are not yet building cities. What archaeology gives us is clusters of mud brick rooms, round storage spaces, hearths, shared walls, small enough that everyone knows everyone. The ancient site of Susa, in what is now southwest Iran, sits in this era as one of the earliest continuously inhabited places on Earth. Layer by layer, the dig record goes down and down. Pottery, grain storage, the bones of domesticated animals. Susa is a name that will echo across every act of this story. The plateau's geography does something interesting from the very beginning. It makes the region a transit zone, not an isolated pocket. Dig layers from this period contain objects from Mesopotamia to the west and trade goods linked to cultures as far east as the Indus Valley. Before Persia exists as a concept, this land is already a crossroads, because the mountain passes and river routes make it the logical path between the ancient world's major population centers. Then, gradually, groups begin migrating in from the Eurasian steppes. New languages, new gods, new horses. The existing populations don't vanish, they blend. Two of these migrating groups, the Medes and the Persians, settle into the western plateau. They are about to collide with something enormous. By around 700 BCE, the Medes have consolidated something historians recognize as an empire, the first Iranian empire, though almost nobody today knows that. Their capital, Ecbatana, sits in the mountains of what is now Hamadan. Greek writers described its walls as stacked in concentric rings, each painted a different color: silver, gold, and several others. Whether that's precise reportage or ancient embellishment, we can't be certain, but the city itself was real and large. A cold air mountain stronghold smelling of horses and iron and cured leather. The Medes are formidable. In 612 BCE, they join an alliance that destroys Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, one of the most feared empires of the ancient world. The balance of Near Eastern power shifts overnight, and then almost nobody remembers them. The Medes weren't destroyed by an enemy. They were absorbed. A vassal tribe to their southeast, the Persians, had been growing quietly under Median overlordship. Their king, Cyrus, leads a rebellion around 550 BCE and wins. But here's what makes Cyrus different. He doesn't dismantle what he takes. He keeps the Median nobles, borrows their administrative networks, and uses the entire system as the skeleton for something the world has genuinely never seen. The Medes become the foundation nobody talks about. The building that goes up next gets all the credit. Imagine walking into Pasargadae, Cyrus's ceremonial capital, around 530 BCE. Wide open space, windswept, white limestone columns rising against the brown plateau. The smell of cedar in the palace halls, sacrificial smoke from the fire altars. And the people. This is where it gets extraordinary. A dozen different ethnicities moving through the same space. Elamite scribes, Lydian merchants, Babylonian priests, Egyptian envoys, all operating under a single administrative system in a single empire. This is the Achaemenid Empire. At its peak, historians estimate it controlled roughly 44% of the world's population, a proportion no empire before or since has matched. Nearly half of everyone alive on Earth inside a single political structure. And that structure ran, in part, on a philosophy unusual for the time. Cyrus recorded, in a clay document we still have, the Cyrus Cylinder, a policy of allowing conquered peoples to return home and keep their religions. Historians debate the framing, but the broad tolerance is well established. The logistics required infrastructure. Darius built the Royal Road, 2,700 kilometers of maintained highway from the empire's western edge to its eastern centers, with rest stations at regular intervals, an ancient postal service and supply chain in one. Then the empire looks west. Darius and Xerxes push into Greece and hit the first wall they cannot break. Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis. The wars don't end the empire, but they plant a narrative in Western memory that will follow Iran for 2.5 millennia. Persia as the villain, the threat from the east. What that story never quite acknowledges. The Persians built Persepolis, and Persepolis was one of the most astonishing things human beings had ever constructed. By 330 BCE, a young Macedonian king named Alexander has crossed the plateau at speed, defeated the Persian army, and arrived at Persepolis. Try to reconstruct what his soldiers would have seen. The Great Apadana, a vast columned audience hall, its walls carved with relief panels showing tribute bearers from every corner of the empire. Ethiopians with elephant tusks, Indians with gold, Scythians with horses. The scale of it was larger than anything standing in Athens. These were men who had marched for years and believed they were coming to conquer a barbaric enemy. What they found stopped them cold. Then Persepolis burned. The destruction is total and archaeologically confirmed. Whether it was a deliberate political act or, as some ancient sources suggest, a night that got out of hand, historians keep that question open. The cedar roofs collapsed. The stone turned red. The reliefs were buried under rubble for 2,000 years. What Alexander does next is strange and telling. He keeps the Persian administrative system. He adopts elements of Persian court dress. He begins presenting himself not just as a conqueror, but as a legitimate heir to what he destroyed. The conqueror becomes, within months, something that looks a lot like a Persian king. He dies young in Babylon in 323 BCE. His empire shatters immediately. The Plateau passes to the Seleucids, Greeks ruling a Persian-speaking world, never quite fitting, never quite losing control. For decades, the Plateau hangs in a cultural in-between. Then, from the northeast, a new Iranian dynasty begins to move, the Parthians, and they will do something no one expects. They will stop Rome. Picture Parthian cavalry somewhere around the 1st century BCE, fast, light, expert archers. The famous Parthian shot is real. A mounted archer, galloping away from an enemy line, twists backward in the saddle and releases an arrow at full draw. Roman soldiers trained in tight formations had no answer for it. In 53 BCE, at the Battle of Carrhae, a Parthian army met 7 Roman legions in what is now southeastern Turkey and destroyed them. The Roman eagle standards, sacred, never to be surrendered, were carried back into Iran. It was Rome's most humiliating defeat in centuries, and the Plateau had delivered it. The Parthians held the eastern edge of the Roman world for roughly 3 centuries. Then their own dynasty collapsed from within, and the Sassanids took over around 224 CE, another Iranian dynasty, this time with Zoroastrianism formalized as the state religion. Fire temples went up across the plateau. A priestly class called the Magi managed a bureaucratic empire with sophisticated coinage and court ritual. At Ctesiphon, near modern Baghdad, the Sassanid throne room featured a barrel-vaulted arch, the Tak Kasra, that still partially stands today. It is, by some measures, the largest unreinforced brick arch ever built. Silk Road caravans moved through Sassanid-controlled territory, carrying Chinese lacquerware, Indian spices, and Central Asian textiles. The smell of cinnamon and dyed wool in the caravanserais. The plateau, at its peak, was the center of the world's trade network. But 2 centuries of almost continuous war with Byzantium slowly bleeds the empire. The Sassanids overreach, lose territory, suffer internal revolts, empty their treasury. By the early 7th century, the empire is structurally exhausted. The court still produces sophisticated art, music theory, and medical knowledge, transmitted first to the Islamic world, then to medieval Europe, where it largely loses its Persian label. Then, from the deserts to the southwest, something moves that nobody on the plateau quite sees coming. The year 651 CE marks the death of the last Sassanid king and the end of pre-Islamic Iran as a political entity. The Arab armies sweeping out of the Arabian Peninsula had already defeated both Byzantium and the Sassanids in the space of a generation, arguably the fastest geopolitical transformation the ancient world had ever seen. Imagine the plateau in the immediate aftermath, fire temples going dark, Zoroastrian priests fleeing eastward, some carrying sacred texts toward India, where their descendants, the Parsis, still live today. Arabic prayers echoing in halls built for a different liturgy, mud brick mosques rising where fire altars stood. The clothing shifts, rough-woven Arab robes mixed with the embroidered court dress of a Persian aristocracy that didn't vanish overnight, just rearranged. The military pivot points are the battles of Al-Qadisiyah around 636 CE and Nahavand around 642 CE. After Nahavand, organized Sassanid resistance collapses. What happens next is subtler and more interesting. Persian does not die. Arabic becomes the language of religion and scholarship across the Islamic world. But Persian absorbs Arabic vocabulary, borrows its script, and within 2 centuries re-emerges as New Persian, Farsi, with its own literary tradition running at full power. The language survived by transforming. Then, in 750 CE, the Abbasid revolution that overthrows the Arab Umayyad dynasty is, in significant part, a Persian revolution. Iranian administrators, military commanders, and bureaucrats are central to it. The new caliphate in Baghdad is soaked in Persian court culture. Iran didn't simply get Islamicized. Islam, but in its imperial form, got Persianized. Persian becomes the literary language of the entire Islamic world, from Istanbul to Delhi. The conquered rewrote the terms of their conquest. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Iranian dynasties, the Samanids, the Buyids, are re-emerging as real powers under nominal Islamic authority. The caliphate nominally still exists. In practice, it is losing its grip. And into that loosening space, Persian culture erupts with extraordinary energy. Picture a court library in Khorasan, the great northeastern cultural heartland. Somewhere around 1000 CE candlelight, the smell of leather binding and fresh ink, scholars sitting side by side, copying Greek philosophical texts alongside Indian mathematical treatises, alongside Persian epic poetry. Paper has recently arrived via the Islamic world from China, and it changes everything. It's cheaper than parchment, faster to produce, and it allows a circulation of ideas at a speed the ancient world never had. 2 figures define this moment more than any others. Ferdowsi completes the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, around 1010 CE. It is an epic of some 60,000 couplets recounting the mythological and historical kings of Iran, from the creation of the world to the Arab conquest. Ferdowsi wrote it almost entirely in Persian, deliberately minimizing Arabic loanwords. It was a cultural act of recovery. Here are our heroes, our language, our story, and it predates Islam without being anti-Islamic. The Shahnameh is still memorized in Iran today. It is one of the great works of world literature, largely unknown outside the Persian-speaking world. At roughly the same moment, Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, is producing a medical encyclopedia that will become the standard European medical text for the next 600 years. He writes in both Arabic and Persian. His work travels west, gets translated into Latin, and enters the Western university curriculum, where it is attributed to Avicenna rather than to Persian scholarship generally. The micro-surprise of this era is that the Renaissance happens under foreign rulers. The Seljuk Turks sweep in from Central Asia around the mid-11th century and take political control of the Plateau. But rather than suppressing Persian culture, they adopt it wholesale. Persian becomes their court language. Their architecture is built by Persian craftsmen. Cultural survival, it turns out, does not require political independence. Iran keeps demonstrating this. And then the next wave arrives, one that tests the proposition to its absolute limit. In 1219, Genghis Khan turns his armies toward the Iranian plateau. What follows is, by any measure, one of the most catastrophic events in human history. Though the precise scale of death is genuinely unknown, and estimates vary so widely that responsible historians keep the numbers general. What is not in doubt is the physical destruction. Nishapur, in northeastern Iran, was one of the Islamic world's greatest cities, a center of scholarship and trade that may have rivaled any city on earth at the time. The Mongols moved through it in days, the silence afterward where there had been constant human noise. The campaign also involved the systematic destruction of the Qanat system, ancient underground irrigation networks that had kept the plateau fertile for millennia. Without maintenance, entire regions reverted to desert. The demographic and economic damage lasted for generations. A generation later, Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, arrived from the east and devastated what the Mongols had left. His towers of skulls outside city walls are recorded by multiple independent sources. The plateau absorbed two catastrophic waves of destruction within roughly 150 years. And yet, the Ilkhanate Mongols, the dynasty that settled Iran after the conquest, converted to Islam and began patronizing Persian art and poetry. The conquerors were absorbed again by the culture they had nearly destroyed. Out of this double catastrophe, Persian miniature painting reaches a height of refinement it had never achieved before. Art flourishing in the ruins of empire, beauty as compensation for devastation. Iran was wounded in ways that would take centuries to repair. But the plateau endured, and in the northwest, a new dynasty was forming with a religious agenda that would define the country to this day. In 1501, a young ruler named Shah Ismail I takes the city of Tabriz and does something that will reshape the entire Islamic world. He declares Twelver Shia Islam the mandatory state religion of Iran. The majority of his new subjects are Sunni. The declaration is enforced within a generation through a combination of persuasion, pressure, and the conversion of the religious establishment. Iran becomes a Shia country. It has remained one ever since. This is the single most consequential act in Iranian history since the Arab conquest. And the Safavid decision drew the defining line between Iran and its Ottoman neighbors to the west, a Sunni empire. That Sunni-Shia fault line runs through the politics of the Middle East to this day. By the 17th century, under Shah Abbas I, the plateau's potential is expressed in stone and tile. The capital moves to Isfahan. Imagine Nakshe Jahan Square in its prime, one of the largest public squares in the world, flanked by a royal mosque whose dome is covered in blue tilework that shifts color as the light changes through the day. Polo played in the center, the sound of hammers from the Bazaar arcade. Armenian Christian craftsmen working alongside Muslim architects brought to Isfahan specifically for their skills. European visitors wrote home comparing Isfahan favorably to the greatest cities they knew. The micro-surprise is the origin of the dynasty that built it. The Safavids were a Turkic-speaking family. Their leaders didn't speak Persian as a first language. They imposed a religious identity that most of their subjects initially opposed, within 2 generations. But that identity became the bedrock of what it means to be Iranian. A national religion imposed by foreign origin rulers, internalized so completely that its origins were forgotten. The dynasty eventually collapsed. Afghan tribes sacked Isfahan in 1722. A period of fragmentation followed, but the plateau survived the dynasty's fall, as it had survived everything else. The religion stayed, the architecture stayed, the borders roughly stayed. The next question, as it always is after a dynasty falls, was simply, who rules? The Qajar dynasty takes control of Iran around 1796 and immediately faces a problem every Iranian ruler since has faced. The country sits between great powers that want what it has. In the 19th century, those powers are Britain and Russia. Through treaties signed under duress, Iran cedes territory to the north and trade rights to both sides. The Great Game, Anglo-Russian competition for Central Asian influence, plays out partly on Iranian soil, with Iranian consent never quite being the priority. The first photographs of Iran date from this era, a court dressing in European suits for official portraits, while governing through structures unchanged in centuries. The contrast is almost comic until you remember the stakes. A country trying to modernize fast enough to avoid being colonized outright, while the powers promoting modernization were simultaneously carving it into spheres of influence. In 1908, oil is discovered at Masjid Soliman. Iran is now not just a corridor or buffer. It is a resource to be extracted. The British government acquires a majority stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. The revenue goes largely outward. The Constitutional Revolution of 1905 to 1911 is one of the least discussed democratic uprisings of the modern era. Iranians, merchants, clergy, intellectuals demand and briefly win a parliament and a constitution. It's one of the first constitutional revolutions in the non-Western world. Then Britain and Russia, the two liberal powers, help suppress it because they prefer a weak, malleable monarchy to a functioning Iranian democracy. The idea doesn't die, it goes underground. In 1921, a military officer named Reza Khan seizes effective power. He will crown himself Shah in 1925, ending the Qajar dynasty and beginning the Pahlavi era. Iran now has oil, a new dynasty with ambitions for rapid modernization, and two great powers still holding the purse strings. The next chapter is about what happens when a country finally tries to take its resources back. Under Reza Shah, and then his son Mohammad Reza Shah, Tehran is transformed fast. Wide boulevards cut through the old bazaar fabric. Women appear in European dress. Universities open. The Trans-Iranian Railway connects the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf. A court in tuxedos and evening gowns operating alongside a rural population, living much as it had for centuries. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, democratically elected and immensely popular, nationalizes the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The logic is elementary. This is Iranian oil extracted from Iranian land, and the profits should serve Iran. Britain responds with an embargo. 2 years later, in 1953, a CIA and British intelligence operation, publicly acknowledged by both governments decades later, overthrows Mossadegh and restores the Shah to full power. It is one of the defining events in modern Iranian history, and it is the event that makes any subsequent claim by Western powers to care about Iranian democracy land hollow in Tehran. The Shah continues modernizing. The White Revolution of the 1960s brings land reform, women's suffrage, and a literacy core that genuinely reaches rural areas. Real change, implemented without democratic consent, enforced by SAVAK, the Shah's feared secret police, against anyone who objects too loudly. Economic growth and political repression existing in the same breath. The oil boom of the 1970s accelerates everything simultaneously: wealth, inequality, resentment, and the gap between a westernized elite in North Tehran and a traditional religious population that feels left behind. In 1978, many Western intelligence agencies assessed the Shah's position as stable. The revolution caught almost everyone off guard. The Plateau, again, moved faster than outside observers expected. Tehran, in 1979, was a city of contradictions that photographs barely capture. Khomeini's image on walls across the city, women in full chadors marching in the same street as women in miniskirts. In those first weeks, a coalition of the secular left, Islamic conservatives, and everyone who simply wanted the Shah gone. The dress codes and the harder ideological lines came later, as the revolution consolidated around a particular vision. The hostage crisis followed within months. 52 American diplomats held for 444 days. The rupture between Iran and the United States has never fully healed. Then, in September 1980, Iraq invaded. The Iran-Iraq War lasted 8 years. Trench warfare in the river marshlands of the southwest. Young men sent to the front in waves. Chemical weapons deployed by the Iraqi side with Western acquiescence. By the time it ended in 1988, hundreds of thousands were dead, and the borders were exactly where they had been. Nothing changed geographically. Everything changed socially. A generation of Iranians came of age entirely inside this war. The Islamic Republic survived the war. It survived the Green Movement of 2009, when millions came into the streets after disputed elections, only to be suppressed. It survived the Woman, Life, Freedom Uprising of 2022, triggered by the death of Mahsa Amini in morality police custody, the largest protest since 1979, driven by a younger generation visibly done with the system. Suppressed again, but each cycle deepens the fracture. The paradox: Iran in the 2020s is one of the most educated, urbanized, and digitally connected societies in the Middle East, and governed by a structure that has closed more space with each passing decade. The gap between those two realities is wider than at any point since 1979. The Plateau has survived everything that came from outside. What it cannot as easily survive is the pressure building from within. Come back to Tehran, the same city we opened on. 17 million people, mountain skyline, smog in the basin, ancient script on modern signs. A city that contains, somewhere in its layers, a mud brick foundation from before writing existed, a Sassanid administrative tradition, an Islamic architectural vocabulary, a constitutional memory that never died, and a generation of young people living in a digital world inside one of the oldest political geographies on Earth. We can reconstruct Persepolis, the archaeology, the measurements, the relief carvings to guide us. We can rebuild Isfahan's bazaar at its Safavid peak, the light through the dome, oculi, the sound of the coppersmiths, the smell of rose water and dye. What we cannot reconstruct is what comes next. That part of the visualization is still rendering. This civilization invented writing systems, administrative empires, poetry of devastating precision, and the concept of tolerating the people you conquered. It has been at the center of the world's trade, the world's religious geography, and the world's geopolitical anxieties for 5,000 years. It has survived, so far, everything thrown at it, from the inside and the outside. Whether that pattern holds is the open question, and it is, genuinely, open. 5,000 years of history, and the story isn't finished. Which city or civilization should we time travel to next? Tell us in the comments. We read every one.